And we'll just go now straight on to Zahid, who is going to talk to us about LTE Advanced.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this talk is slightly on a different path. It's like where I'm talking about the technology. So a brief word about our company, Explanotech. We are technical consulting company. We work on technology. We talk to people about how to uh, how to implement certain things, what is needed, what is not needed. We go to low level coding and things like that. And our main area of focus from where we derived our name is we are a training company as well. And being a small company, every time we go and say like, oh, we can do a training for you, everybody says we don't need training. But when we manage to convince them and we do training, they say, oh, we didn't know about these things. So it's always good to have that kind of a feedback. Right. So just going a bit back and looking at all different from 1G all the way to up to 4G. Um, Initially, as Simon actually stole a bit of a thunder from my presentation because he already told the part of the story. So initially, the networks were designed for voice, and this is what the focus was for 1G and to a lot of extent 2G. When I started working at the beginning, when the transitions were happening from 2.75 to 3G, everybody used to say like, why do we need 3G? Why do we need data on the phone? Phones are for voice. Maybe occasionally we might want to check something, emails maybe. That's the maximum they could think about. Why do we need 3G? And well, since the iPhone was invented, we know what happened. Everybody is on their device all the time. When I used to go on the train long back, people used to look at each other, smile. Now everyone's just looking at their phones, tablets, Kindles. So we never have any eye to eye contact, which is good and bad. Um, I'm a bit like Simon because what is known as 4G and what is being rolled out as 4G or LTE, I'm sure some of you must have not heard the term LTE before. That 4G is the same as LTE, but officially LTE is not really 4G. We call it the 3.9G, right? But since now there is not much point because everybody calls it 4G, we are now stuck with the term 4G. So the actual 4G, the real 4G is what is the LTE advance, which is coming in the future. um, I can't really go in technical details, even though I'm speaking on 4G, but I'm going to just briefly mention like what exactly we can achieve using this LTE advance. So just to mention that all these technologies, they happen in something known as the releases, which is the 3GPP releases. So what is being rolled out now is generally the release 8, release 9 standards, which was defined in 2008, right? And it was the main standard was released in 2008. We are now in 2013. Okay, so there is a long way from it becoming a standard to it being rolled out practically. So release 10 was finalized sometime in 2011. The release 11 has already been finalized. Standards are working on release 12, but the LTA is still like something like a year away, and it would generally come uh, in the Far East, in Japan, Korea, in the US before we will see it here, maybe sometime in 2015. So these are the different evolution paths which different countries have taken to actually go to the LTE LTA network. It's like in US, you have some operators who have gone from the CDMA path to this LTE LTA. In China, they have something known as the narrowband UMTS, the narrowband, which is known as the TDS CDMA. They have their own evolution path. This is probably nobody's going to put that, so it's going to go via this path, via the TDHSPA. In Europe, mostly we have gone from GSM to 3G. These are all different variations of 3G. This is the HSPA, the high speed packet access networks, the release 7, release 8 advanced ones. And this is the path for us to go to LTE. whereas in past we had a separate FDD and a TDD network. So the operators would deploy either you can have a TDD variant of the network or an FDD, which is the time division duplex and the frequency division duplex. In LTE, you can probably have a combination of both. You can have like the network could be supporting FDD as well as TDD. The device might be supporting both. It may be handing over when you are going from one cell to another. You may go from FDD to TDD and vice versa. In theory, it's all possible. In practice, it will depend on what spectrum is available for an operator and how he decides to deploy it. So when we talk about LTE and the evolution, etc., the term LTE, so generally a network comprises of two different parts, which is one is the what we call as the core network, and other one is the access network, right? And all these the 2G and the 3G, they were more of a access network change. The core network, well, it had a little bit of evolution when it moved from 2G to 3G, but it nearly remained the same. When we moved to LTE, you had two different evolutions. You had a system architecture evolution from the 2G 3G core network to the EPC, what we call as the evolved packet core. You had the access network evolution from GRAN, from the GSM CDMA based wideband CDMA based UTRAN, and this is the OFDMA based EUTRAN, right? So the actual terminology for this whole thing is known as the evolved packet system. So the real term which people should have been using is the evolved packet system, but LTE sounded cool, long term evolution. We also call it as the long term employment because it keeps us busy. And we are going to stick with the term LTE, unfortunately, in the future. So the way it was evolved is sometime back, probably a couple of years back, all these operators started shouting that the core network is actually overloaded. We have the signaling tsunami, right? Because the devices, they used to do all this, people uh, install all these different applications like Facebook, Twitter, Skype. All these applications, they need to keep alive. So for keeping alive, they need to keep on sending regularly a message to the server, and all these messages were causing a lot of signaling, and it overloaded the network in such a way that the network operators said like, oh, we are having a signaling tsunami. Luckily, in the standards, the way evolved packet core is designed, it has got two different components, whereas in the past you had just one component which used to handle data as well as signaling. In the evolved packet core, you have two different components. So if suppose you go to an area where there are devices which are doing a lot of signaling, like a lot of handsets, you can just add in additional components to handle the signaling. If you go to another area where you have a lot of dongles which are doing maybe a lot of data transfer, you can just add in component which will handle more data. So I say this is actually future proofing the network. So the new networks what we have, this is being future proofed by this. This is an area which is like a discussion, an area of discussion. So uh, who has not heard about Samsung mentioning something about 5G last week? Who has not heard about Samsung saying 5G? Anything about 5G? You haven't heard? Well, I'm sure Professor Rahim would say something about that. Um, so everybody is now talking about 5G. Like, I still, my phone still keeps on bumping onto 2G, right? My 3G coverage is patchy. We are rolling out 4G, and companies have started talking about 5G. This is an unfortunate situation. So the way the way the architecture is that in future, when we have 5G, your core will still remain the same. Okay, because as I said, LTE is just this thing, the whole thing, the evolved packet system. This thing is now, I think, is future proofed. It may have certain evolutionary components, but you can stick in 5G. Maybe 3-4 years down the line you will start talking about 6G, but this component should remain the same. I just wanted to highlight another area which I wasn't aware Simon will steal my limelight on that area as well. Um, but this is from a 1947 paper, a white paper from one of those IEEE magazines, and this is from what I call as the 0G. Okay, it's not even 1G. 1G was analog amps. This is 0G, and this was a conceptual thing. So this is from US Long Island area. This all these things are like small or cells on which the mobile can actually uh, do a voice call in these areas. There is no such thing as handover or roaming. If you go out from one of these cells to another of these cells, the call will drop, right? Look at this, and look at the size of these cells, and this is from 1947, and this is what is there today. So all these blue dots which you see, they are the actual macro networks. So from really, really big cells, we have gone to this, well, it's not really, because it's a map at a very high level. It's still a big cell, it's still a macro coverage, right? But comparatively, it's much more smaller. And what has happened is, from 1947 to around like 2010, 2012, the capacity of the networks, they have increased a million fold. Okay, and how has it reached this million fold? It's because, in very, very simple terms, a capacity is a multiplication of these three different terms: the quantity of spectrum, the spectrum efficiency, and the number of cells, right? The quantity of spectrum, well, it has increased by 25 times. The spectrum efficiency has increased by 25 times, but the number of cells has increased by 1600 times. Okay, and this is all I'm talking about is the macro cells. I'm not bringing small cells into the picture yet. Okay, and this has given rise to a million fold capacity. So naturally, what really makes sense is that in future we have what Simon has already said. We have HetNets, or the heterogeneous networks. It's just a simple way of saying, say, this is one macro cell, one big macro cell, and that macro cell, within macro cell, there could be a lot of other cells. Yeah, so there could be something like a pico cell, a metro cell, other small cells. Maybe there is a femto cell here. There are relays. This is the kind of model which we are going to see in the future, the heterogeneous networks. There are different because we need to improve the capacity of the network. The networks are overloaded. Everyone talks about the 1000x network challenge, and I think this term has been made very popular by Qualcomm, which says like, oh, this 1000x challenge we will meet by more spectrum, more small cells, and more indoor cells. I tried looking for the exact figure, like, how much more spectrum, more small cells, but I couldn't find something from Qualcomm. I'm sure there is something out there, but I just couldn't get my hands on them. But what I found is, I found some interesting figures from some other companies who also have a similar vision of maybe 1000x, and maybe in one instance 100x. And say, for example, Nokia Siemens Networks, what they say is, to achieve this 1000x, they just need a simple 10 times spectrum, 10 times spectral efficiency, 10 times densification. Very simple: 10 times 10 times 10 times 1000 times. Or there is entity Docomo, which is a bit more serious, and they do a lot of research in this area, and they say like, look, spectrum, well, we can only increase it maybe by less than 3 times, whereas the efficiency, there is a lot of scope of improving the efficiency. And I'm sure Professor Rahim is going to talk about how 5G is more about spectral efficiency rather than something else. And they say like, okay, maybe 15 times more densification, more small cells, femto cells, metro cells, micro cells. Huawei, they say like, look, you know what, we are talking about 100x rather than 1000x, and their figure is again densification, or the small cells, which is going to be a bigger part of achieving all this capacity. This was mainly what I wanted to talk about. As one last final thought, what I want to say is like, look, it's not that difficult for the technologies to achieve what you want it to achieve. Like, whether it's 3G, whether it's 4G, whether it's LTE Advanced, 5G, they are great. But one of the biggest barriers and one of the biggest problems is the cost. And it's not just the cost uh, for each of us individual who are actually living in a certain area, but it's also something, the roaming cost. The roaming cost is the roaming is certainly a broken area. I was in the US last week. As soon as I actually landed there, I switched my phone on. The text message I got from the operator says, "You won't be charged for more than 5 MB, pound 5 per MB of data." Pounds 5 for 1 MB of data, which is really ridiculous. And this is what you have to take into account. The reason a lot of people actually shun all these cellular technologies when they actually roam, right? And they try and hook onto Wi-Fi is because of all these prohibitive costs. And it's not only the prohibitive cost for roaming. Nowadays, we just don't have one device. We have many devices. We have ebook readers, which get books over the data network. We have live traffic on our sat navs. We have phones. We have multiple of these devices. We have tablets. All these things, all these cost factors add up. So I think this is one of the areas which operators have to look into, making everything a more cost friendly for each one of us. Thank you.